So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with an embossing tutorial. Here's my stamp. It is a nice grid pattern and it's going to look really neat when we're all done. I'm going to be doing it for the project, for the 4x6. I'm going to be doing it on white paper, but I'm going to show it to you on red too because we're also going to be embossing in white embossing powder, and so it will show up a lot better on the red so that you can kind of see what's going on if you've never embossed anything before. So this is our embossing ink pad, and it looks a little gummy because I'm not always as good with cleaning my embossing pads or my stamps as I think I am. Anyway, so we're just going to, it's nice and juicy. It's a clear embossing ink, but with a little bit of a tint of blue, so you can kind of see where it is on the paper, but you know, it doesn't actually leave much of a color when all is said and done. I prefer to use this over a tinted pad, but that's just personal preference. You can use either as long as it's a pigment ink or specifically for embossing. If it's a dye-based ink, it'll dry out too quick. So we've got it good and inked up. You can kind of see it. And then we're going to press our stamp down and see, kind of see a little bit there. Anyway, so we're going to ink up again. And I was always taught pat, pat, twist, pat, pat, twist. Kind of make sure ink is getting where it needs to go. Now, here's the one I'm going to use for the 4x6. And I always do more than one. Like, I can already see a little bit of smushed in there, but you know, that's okay. We can clean that up in a second. But if I'm going to emboss something, I usually like to do more than one piece, just in case I screw the first one up. Anyway, so there you go. You kind of see, and I'm going to use a little tiny paintbrush to pick up that little bit of schmutz there. You can kind of see it. Alright, so that's it for the stamp and the stamp pad. Now we're going to take our stamped images, and I've got a paper plate here, and I'm going to put the image in the paper plate, so this is going to catch the rest of our embossing powder, and we're just going to sprinkle it over, and it'll be like magic. Tap, tap, tap. See, that's what the ink is picking up the embossing powder. So now we're going to do it on the white ones. And the reason why I'm sprinkling this over a container of some sort is so that we can be as generous as we need to with the embossing powder. See, you can see it's kind of shiny there. You can kind of see, and I can see a couple of spots didn't stamp too well, so again, this is why I do more than one. And we give it a good tap to get all the excess off. Set that aside. And then we're going to just funnel our embossing powder back into the container. Done. Okay. So now the magic happens. Again, if you've never embossed before, heat embossed before, this is going to be kind of cool. First, I can tell on this red one that I've got some extra embossing powder kind of hanging on the cardstock. This isn't a real huge deal if you're going to be cutting out your image, but if you're not, if you're doing this in place and you need to make sure that there's not a lot of extra bits around, because they will emboss too if they're there, just go ahead and take a little clean paintbrush and kind of brush off any extra areas where it might have gotten clumpy or too much. And then we're just kind of going to clean off our workstation there. Okay, so now, to emboss, you need the embossing ink or the pigment ink that's going to take a little while to dry, embossing powder, something to stamp on, a stamp, and a heat gun. This is not a hair dryer. It blows out heat, not hot air. I mean, obviously there's air there, but it's not blowing air, because otherwise, if it were blowing air, your embossing powder would just kind of flutter away, and you don't want that. So, this is going to be loud, but what I'm going to do is when I turn it on, I'm going to hold it about 4 inches or so away from the embossing powder on the paper, and I'm going to move it back and forth a little bit, but not too much. You don't want to do wide swaths, otherwise you won't get anything done. And I'm going to wiggle it around until I see the embossing powder start to change. So we're going to do the red one first, again, because this is going to show it a little bit better. And you'll see, I hope, depending on how good this camera is, you'll see the powdery embossing, well, powder, obviously, duh, go from the pebbly look to a smooth, raised texture. That's what we're going for. Okay, it's gonna be loud, sorry. See, I'm just moving it across, back and forth a little bit, and it's heating up. And once it starts to heat, and there we go. You see it start to change? It's like a little domino effect, see? Let's hold it up a little bit. You see, it's starting to get, the lines are getting a little thicker. And almost there. I'm going to make sure everything gets a fair shot. Let's see. A little bit more. You want to be careful not to get too close because it can scorch. Let's see. There we go. There's the last of it. Turn this off. See? So it went from being powdery and pebbly to being these nice raised lines. I don't know if you can kind of see the texture a little bit. It's also got a little bit of shine to it. Basically, the way it was explained to me is that embossing powder is these little tiny, tiny, tiny bits of plastic. And so when we heat them up, what does plastic do? It melts. So that's how this works. If you've ever seen thermography, which is kind of a faux engraving on invitations, those raised invitations, that's very similar to what this is. Alright, so real quick, I'm going to do these white on whites so we can move on. Alright, and there we go. There we have a couple of images with the white on white. And now we're going to do something fun with these. So now I'm going to take my colored pencils. Now these are not just any colored pencils. These are actually watercolor pencils. And you know, they'll say watercolor on them. Kind of nice. What these do is they act like watercolor paints, only you have a little bit more precision with them. And you can color them into spots, and then if you get them wet, either with brush or spritz on some water like we're going to do in a minute, you'll find that the colors, you lose all those pencil marks, and what you end up with is this nice flowy watercolor look. Anyway, I'm using some greens and blues, and I'm just going to start kind of from the top down. And I'm going to fill in these innermost squares. And you don't have to be super, super careful with them. And yeah, you can see that I'm kind of taking some liberties with the squarish shapes. Don't worry, we're going to fill everything in. But I'm just doing this for effect. And I'm not worrying too much about the stuff in the little lines in between. You can go in there, but that's okay. What we're going to do later is going to kind of work on those too, but you want to be careful not to press too hard on the actual embossing itself. Kind of go light, because again, this is just a little bit of melted plastic onto some paper, and if you press too hard, yeah, it'll come off and you won't have any embossing left. Okay. So now we're done with our pencils. Kind of put those aside. Oops. Alright. And what we've got is our embossed paper, our embossed design on white paper, and we've got watercolor pencil filling the different boxes in kind of a rough gradient, we'll call it. We're going to get some paper towels because this next step is messy. And this is just a spritz bottle full of regular tap water. Nothing fancy about it. It's just regular water. Alright, take the cap off. And now we're going to spritz. And you can see that the watercolor pencils are already starting to muddy. You just kind of keep going. You don't want to like soak it, but you know, this is why we're not just pouring water. Anyway, and now that our paper is damp and our pencils are starting to get wet, I'm going to take my paintbrush from before and I'm just going to kind of move it over and get all these wonderful colors just kind of mixed together. And see? And you can really see now, or you can start to see, you'll see it better in a minute, the way the white embossing is really starting to stand out and kind of see. Like I said, you'll see better in a minute because we're going to go back after we've done this. We've got everything nice and damp. We are going to go back to our heat gun because we are impatient and we don't want to have to wait for this to dry the old-fashioned way. We're going to go ahead and use the heat gun to dry things out. I'm drying the back too. It keeps the paper from curling quite as much because paper acts funny when it gets wet. Alright. You see we're just about done. Get that to relax. Okay. Alright. So it's still a little damp, but that's okay. It's gonna have a moment to dry while we go ahead and we work on the rest of the 4x6 card. But you can see that the watercolor pencils have started to kind of, you know, they've kind of smushed around a little bit. You can see a few on some of the ones I didn't smudge as much. But we've got this great watercolor effect that is working with, not against, our embossing. So, that done. Alright, so now what we're going to do, is we're just going to cut out our little windows here. Okay, so now we have two, and let's see, this one I think is the better one. So that's the one we're going to use on our 4x6, and we're just going to set that aside for right now. And we're going to move on to the collage portion of our project. Okay, let's see. Here I have, these are a bunch of images that I cut out from this magazine. It's a kitchen and bath magazine from, good lord, how old is this? 1996. I keep things for a long time. But basically I just went through and I picked out images that I really liked that kind of fit for the window effect that I was kind of working on, and then I also cut out these little words. Now when you're cutting out words for something like this, you want to concentrate on the larger type words. So these all came from titles and subtitles and, you know, like headings and stuff. And you can see they're all about the same size. If you have different sizes and stuff, that's not a problem. This just happened to work out where everything but the what is pretty much the same. Anyway, but I've already got my images out, so I'm going to put the magazine aside. And we are going to set the words aside for now too. Try and kind of keep them in some sort of order, but we're not going to need them right now. And then I'm just going to kind of So yeah, alright, so that's kind of how I want things. So now I'm going to take my Mod Podge. This is just decoupage medium. You could use anything. You could use thinned out like white glue. Really, it doesn't have to be this particular brand or anything. You just need something that's going to dry clear and it's going to stick everything together. Mod Podge is what works for me, so you know, that's what we use. Foam brush, nice and easy to clean up. Some people pour this into a separate bowl. I say, why bother? Even if it's plastic, that's one less thing that I have to throw away or something like that. Anyway, so start by just putting a little bit of the decoupage medium on your 4x6 piece of paper. Don't worry about it being too precise. And then start laying your images down, and you're going to go back over and you're going to paint on top, and this is going to get it all nice and stuck down really well. So for right now, that's good, and we're going to give this a shot with the heat gun, again, because we're impatient. And yeah, it's going to curl a little bit. That happens, no biggie. It's kind of part of it. When you get done, this is going to be flat, so you can always press it under a couple of heavy books. We'll take our scissors again, and we're just going to trim off the extra. There we go. So there's our image. There's our background. This is all of our put together background. Now I am also going to, I've got this great blue iridescent punchinella that I'm also going to use for part of this. Oop, looks like I'm going to need to trim it. But now I'm kind of trying to figure out where I want everything. And here's our words are going to come back into play. Okay, so my camera shut off a bit, so you didn't see that I trimmed the punchinella into kind of a free-form curvy shape, and I stuck it down with more Mod Podge. What I did different though was that I only put the Mod Podge on the background. I did not go back over the punchinella because I did not want to lose the shine. Again, this is what I'm using as a matte Mod Podge, and I like it overall, but it would have dulled the punchinella, so I wanted to leave it a little bit shiny. So I did not go back over it, but it works great for sticking this down the way, you know, a lot of glue, other glues wouldn't, because, you know, it'd try to get in all the holes and stuff like that. And then we've also gone ahead, you can see, we've stuck our words down. So the saying that I chose was, what does your window to the world show you? Just kind of a, you know, random question, but that's why I was going for views and windows and things like that. And so here we have our own little window, and looks like it could stand to be trimmed just a little bit more. And I have put some adhesive squares on the back. I'm not using Mod Podge again for this because, again, I don't want to have to go back over it to make sure it's adhered down. These will stick fairly well. And I'm going to place this kind of sky up, grass down on here like that. Alright, I'm just going to give it a good smush onto there. Alright, now to finish, about the only thing we have left to finish is I want to add something decorative to kind of make these edges neater. And I just felt that was kind of, that little punchinella leg right there is kind of being pokey. And then I think I also want to do something to kind of finish the window a little bit, just a tiny bit. So what I have here is washi tape. This is it's called Japanese masking tape or paper tape. And basically it's printed tape. And I've got a couple of different patterns. I'm going to use bits of this kind of on the top and bottom of my window. Just kind of make it interesting. You can see that it's not entirely opaque. You can see through it a little bit, again, because that's, you know, it's masking tape. And then I'm gonna take, this is actually kind of an airmail pattern, and I am going to place it all the way around. And then I think the last thing I'm going to do is use a little bit of glitter spray, because I can, basically. You know, if you have any kind of mists or anything like that that you want to use, that's great. You can. Yeah, I just feel like a little bit of silver glitter. Woo, look at it. I don't know if you can see it. But there we go. Alright. And here we go. There's our finished 4x6 window to the world.